Deputy Róisín Shortall.
I'm glad to have the opportunity to contribute to this debate and to, at the outset, commend Justice Charleton for the extraordinary work that he's done. I think we really, he has done extraordinary service to the state, I think, in relation to this report. It is very wide-ranging. It is very, very complimentary in relation to Sergeant McCabe. It is damning of others, but I think most importantly it draws very clear lessons in relation to a number of our public services, how they're organised and the kind of unhealthy culture that underpins some of those services and which is crying out for reform and to be dealt with at the highest level in government. And more of that anon, but I would also draw attention to the fact that Justice Charleton instances a number of occasions when things could have been done differently, and if they had been done differently there wouldn't have been any need for the tribunal. And I would add to those comments by saying that if senior people in government had taken a different attitude to the whistleblowing of Sergeant McCabe, and I would include in those senior people in government in particular then Taoiseach Enda Kenny, if he and other senior people in government had taken a different approach to Sergeant McCabe from the beginning, there wouldn't have been a need for that for the tribunal. The most striking thing, I suppose, coming out of the tribunal is the fact that Justice Charleton very much endorses a view that many of us, and indeed I think the public at large, have in respect of Sergeant Maurice McCabe, finding that he was an entirely genuine person, that he is an entirely genuine person, and that he did the state considerable service. The report is an effective total vindication of the work of Sergeant McCabe, and it found that he had the interests of the people of Ireland uppermost in his mind. That kind of attitude and that view of Sergeant McCabe permeates effectively the entire tribunal report. We know that personally Maurice and his wife and his family have been through the most awful time imaginable over recent years, and he was coping with that in the full glare of the media and in the public eye. And really it is a measure of the strength of Maurice himself, his wife Lorraine and their family that they were able to withstand that and come out of it not just totally vindicated, but come out of it as such a strong person and such a strong family. And Charleton refers to this in terms of him making the statement that Maurice McCabe remains an officer of exemplary character, a person of admirable fortitude in spite of all of the enormous personal and professional difficulties that he faced over recent years, or that he was faced with, I should say, over recent years. We do undoubtedly owe him an enormous debt of gratitude, and I think that's a very heartfelt feeling that goes right around this country in relation to the extraordinary public service that Maurice McCabe has done, and we can only express our heartfelt thanks in that regard and wish him and his family the very best for the future. The Charleton report found that Maurice McCabe was repulsively denigrated for being no more than a good citizen and a good police officer. It also found that in investigating the calumny against him other aspects of our national life have been laid bare. And these are critical findings of the Tribunal. And I note that the Minister for Justice didn't say a huge amount about those other aspects of our national life that have been laid bare. And I would have thought that a week after the report has come out, that there would have been a more substantive response from government in respect of those services and those huge problems with some of our public services that have been laid bare in this report. In that regard, I certainly hope that the Minister for Children will be responding also in relation to areas under her responsibility within this debate. I haven't heard that she's going to do that, but I expect that she will. But it was disappointing to hear the Minister earlier, and I think his contribution fell very far short of what was required in response to the very deep problems and deep dysfunction that Charleton has found, particularly in the Gardaí and also in Tusla. On an individual basis, in relation to severe findings against individual people in the report, clearly the standout person is Martin Callinan, ex-Garda Commissioner. And the report found that he engaged in a deliberate campaign to denigrate and smear Maurice McCabe. It has to be said again that if action had been taken at an early stage, when then Commissioner Callinan made the infamous, disgusting remarks at the PAC, where, you know, they were standout issues, that was a standout moment when action should have been taken, and it wasn't. And rather than, you know, that matter being dealt with, what we had was a circling of the wagons and senior government people coming to the defence of the then Commissioner. And that was clearly a mistake. And I think you can say that the deep-seated problems that Charleton refers to within the Gardaí, that really Martin Callinan was the embodiment of a lot of those very serious problems within the Gardaí. Equally, the then press officer, hand-picked by Martin Callinan, Mr. Dave Taylor, Inspector Dave Taylor, as he is now, a retired Inspector Dave Taylor. It was found that he was, as a witness, he lacked all credibility. The report says that Superintendent Dave Taylor is a witness whose credibility was completely undermined by his own bitterness and by the untruthful nature of his affidavit. That his motivation in bringing forward this allegation was to stop or undermine a criminal investigation rightly taken against him. I think in that regard, again, very damning of Dave Taylor himself, but a dreadful reflection on the fact that that person was allowed to operate, or was chosen to operate as the front person for the Gardaí, was an extraordinary decision, and again that has to be down to Martin Callinan. I believe that in relation to Tusla, what Charleton has shown up is an utterly dysfunctional organisation, an organisation which is an extremely important organisation in this country insofar as it's charged with child welfare and child protection responsibilities. And the idea that an important organisation like that could be shown to be so utterly dysfunctional and worse raises huge issues about accountability in that organisation and about the need for political leadership in terms of addressing those issues that have been identified. The Charleton report talks about startling inefficiency and indolence within the service, and talks about that situation where a letter from Tusla being delivered to the wrong address, for example, about the mix-up on the file. You know, it'd be hard to make it up that the level of mistakes were so grave in that. And, you know, the conclusion was come to by many people that, you know, this had to be a stitch-up. But, you know, extraordinarily, it was found to have been a coincidence, an extraordinary coincidence. And, you know, I am not doubting that finding, but what I am saying is the fact that there could have been a litany of errors like that were so damaging to Maurice McCabe, that they could have taken place within a new and modern organisation, or what's supposed to be a modern organisation, really beggars belief that the depth of the dysfunction in that organisation could be such that those kind of errors could have been made. You know, Charleton refers to procedures being chaotic there, you know, there was inertia of its management in the Cavan Monaghan district. The mistake was discovered almost immediately, but that was because Ms D, when she came to know of the rape offence allegation against Maurice McCabe, protested that she had never claimed such a thing. If she hadn't come forward and done that, you know, who knows what the outcome of that would have been. And Charleton said that should have resulted in an immediate and definitive correction within TUSLA, but it didn't. So not only were there serious errors made all along the way in relation to the handling of those two complaints in respect of Maurice McCabe, but that when those errors came to light, that the responsive management was wholly inadequate. Charleton says another essential procedure was not undertaken back in 2006 and 2007, and that is the standard procedure where if a serious allegation of abuse is made against somebody, well then that is brought to that person, it is put to that person, and of course that never happened. So breaches of procedure and protocol all over the place. The Tribunal realised that the file had what Charleton refers to as being filleted. A huge level of dishonesty within that organisation, a huge level of dysfunction, and a failure to stand up for the truth, and where those serious errors were found on management's part, a complete and utter failure to deal with it appropriately. You know, as I say, they raised the most significant issues for the political system, and particularly the Minister for Children, in terms of how she is going to respond to that. This is an organisation which was set up specifically to deal with child protection issues as a result of the failings of the HSE, and it turns out that it's an entirely dysfunctional organisation in terms of what we've learned from Charleton. The other area, of course, is in relation to the Gardaí, and it has to be said that Charleton is absolutely damning in relation to its findings in respect of the Gardaí. A failure to be honest, a failure to stand up for the truth, a failure to come forward when wrongdoing is discovered, a mentality within the organisation which is more concerned with protecting itself and, you know, looking after itself and covering up than it is about the truth and about serving the public interest. There is that kind of mentality that has been identified on umpteen occasions, which exists, unfortunately, in some of our public bodies, and that is a kind of culture which is about going along to get along, so that loyalty to the organisation is more important than the truth, or more important than serving the public interest. Public servants' first responsibility is to serve the public and to serve the public interest. And in respect of both TUSLA and the Gardaí, they have been found to be seriously wanting in respect of both of those things. Charleton says that the Gardaí offered no criticism at all of themselves, and that they need a complete turnaround in their attitude. A few members of the force were commended, Chief Superintendent Terry McGinn for one. But Charleton goes on to say that our police force is a resource of brilliant men and women. While it is a single-level entry service, it regularly produces people of extraordinary devotion to duty and intelligence at the highest level. It is the police force that needs to be supported and fostered. How dispiriting it must be for those good and conscientious men and women and that they are crying out for leadership within the Gardaí and indeed leadership at a political level. And what's needed is a serious change in culture. In that regard, I want to say just it's important to bear in mind the comments of the minority report from the Garda Commission, the Commission on the Future of Policing. And I would say that in light of what Charleton has found, it is really important for the Minister to go back and look at that minority report that was produced. It was produced by Vicky Conway and Dr Eddie Malloy and has been supported by some very eminent people, including Dennis Bradley and Professor Dermot Walsh. That is what is required in the Gardaí more than anything else. Independent oversight that is not captured by the Department of Justice or not captured by senior people within the Gardaí. And I call on the Minister to change his approach in that regard. Thank you.